Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Jojy.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today I have my buddy Sandy. She's joining me on this conversation because I ran across the topic and I was trying to find the person who might want to dip their toe into this conversation because it might get a little edgy, but I think Sandy and I are the perfect duo for an edgy conversation. So welcome, Sandy.
Thank you, Jojy. So glad to be here. Yeah, I love the topic.
Great. And so let me just introduce the topic for our listeners. It's an article from the New York Times. It was a Sunday article maybe I'd say anywhere from a month to 2 months ago. It is called There's a Cure for Our Attraction to Narcissistic Leaders, and it's written by Adam Grant. And the reason why this appealed to me was because, Sandy, and well, some of the folks that know me know that I was a business coach and I did a lot of coaching with executives and trying to help executives become the best version of themselves as they are moving up into leadership or they are mentoring other people. And this article really talks about how in Greek mythology, it starts out by talking about the fact that the man who falls in love with himself and his reflection withers away and dies. But in modern America, it appears that the individual who's in love with themselves actually can get the corner office, or in our situation, the Oval Office. And, I don't want it to go too much into the politics, but I think you can't not mention it given the government and the administration we have today. But I do want to have a broader conversation about, what is it about men that allow them to use their narcissism to climb the corporate ladder or just the ladder of life, whereas women, if we are perceived as being full of ourselves, then we are seen as either being a bitch or, a queen bee, which is a conversation we've had here on this podcast before. And as a way to jump into that conversation, I want you, Sandy, to talk to our listeners about the challenges you went through to start a business with some of your business colleagues now probably 40, 50 years ago, and what all you had to go through to secure that bank loan. I want the listeners to understand that as the context for this conversation.
Yes, Jojy. Of course, fortunately, times have changed, but considering the number of years ago, because I'm going to say that this is maybe, oh my God, almost 50 years ago. I mean, women were not respected whatsoever. And you had very few role models. And those women who were forging the way to make themselves respected and heard were received a lot of backlash as being troublemakers, just wanted to quiet us. And I was young and it wanted to start a business, and I had two friends, and we talked about it. This was our dream to start this business, and we thought we had all these ideas and everything. Well, all we needed was some money, and we didn't think that we would. We went from bank to loan companies everywhere, and they kind of laughed at us. You want to do what? You want us to lend you money? And we don't even have checking accounts for women, let alone give them business loans. I mean, that was a response that we had. And this was in New England. Actually, it was in Massachusetts, in a town called Gloucester, which is known as Cape Ann. There's been many famous movies written about Gloucester. And there was quite an artistic community there. And we were opening one-of-a-kind, very unique craft store, but not with crafts. I mean, with stained glass and artwork and pottery and handcrafted jewelry and things like that. And we had found all these wonderful, we were traveling to all over to the country, upstate New York. We finally found a great artisans. We found all these artists who were willing to share their artwork with us on consignment to get us started, but we still needed money in order to pay the rent and have a signage and promote our business. So we kept at it. It was a lot of, I forget how long it took us, but it was about a year. And finally we walked into this bank, Gloucester National Bank, in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and the three of us went in, and we were surprised. We were actually treated very nicely, and they thought it was, kind of a unique. Maybe it was because of the area. There were a lot of. There's an area known as Bearskin Neck, which is very famous today. There's hundreds and hundreds of art galleries and artisan shops, and after some time, they finally agreed to lend us enough money to start the business. And
Was that the time? I mean, I heard that there was a period where you couldn't get any, your spouse had to co-sign for you. Was
right,
that rule
they
for,
didn't require that. They didn't require it. They didn't require it. I mean, they ran our credit, and fortunately, all of us. Mine was a little marginal because I was struggling, going through a divorce. So, and going through a divorce, but my other two partners were stable, had stable homes, and between the three of us, I mean, none of us had a lot of money. We were all struggling. We all had young families, but they did not require us to get our husband's signature, because that would never have happened if I had to get my husband's signature. He was the one that was not credit worthy at this point in time. No, we don't know. I wish I could ask that question now. Why when everybody else turned us down, and this was not just this town of Gloucester. This was pretty much going on everywhere. You just did not, unless you had sizable money. There were businesses that were women owned, but very, very few. So, I mean, we were just absolutely thrilled. And to this day, I still carry, they gave us a card, saying that we were, approved to, I forget what the amount of money was. And I was so proud of it that I never, after all these years, never disposed of it. But there was, like I said, I was also very active in that time. And all my friends, we were into consciousness raising groups. So we were fighting for women's rights all the time. That was who we were. But we were mothers, and we we all were educated. We wanted to start a business. It just was an unheard of thing to do. And I think it's still more difficult today. I mean, today's things are certainly a lot better, but there was a time that it wasn't Massachusetts, it was in Illinois, it was all over the country. It was unheard of for women to be thought worthy or smart enough. There was never really a good reason why they were turning people down. We never got an answer. They just said, no. Could you tell us why? They would never have it. You don't qualify. That's all. You don't qualify. We're not lending any money for small businesses. They had all kind of no solid answer.
but Sandy, what do you think the real reason was?
Because women were not respected. I mean, women were supposed to stay home, raise their kids, be seen or not heard. I mean, I grew up with that philosophy. You're to be seen and not heard. And that was pretty much all over the country, is the attitude that men had towards women. Yeah, they're great at baking pie, having babies, and there are still people today that still have that same attitude.
Yeah, and sadly, we're going backwards into that.
And we have an administration who is encouraging that, who feels that way. Our vice president, I mean, his wife, he could care less about his wife. She's just, the only thing she's good for is, pumping out babies. And we are going back to that. Killing Roe versus Wade, everything that's happening today, where the clocks are going back. It's disgraceful, but I think that there's enough positive there are enough people that realize that women are finally starting, still after all these years, they're making a name for themselves. We just need more women in politics.
Yeah. So let
And
me
that-
this. So, I mean, given the fact that men sort of have it, sort of number one, society wants them to be successful and will give them all the opportunities that they prevent, really women from having, or we have to prove ourselves twice as hard as men do. How do you think that the narcissistic personality fits into how society sets us up differently? Do you think that, like what came first, the chicken or the egg, do you think, in this situation?
Well, I think narcissism played a major role, but I don't think we even knew what narcissism was. It wasn't talked about. Maybe psychiatrists might have talked about it, but the disease was probably known, but it wasn't. People were not labeled narcissists. Well, yeah, in the history, I mean, you go back and you talk about Hitler, but it really was not talked about in men in general. Men are threatened. They don't have, despite all this, women still had their self-esteem. Even though men were constantly putting women down, they had higher self-esteem than men do. And I think the lack of self-esteem is definitely, is characteristic of a narcissistic person. And I think that was just, like I said, we didn't put labels on things then. At least I don't recall. But they were threatened. Men were greatly threatened by women.
Now, that the article talks about is how when they studied, when you do look at the literature and you study sort of like even like playground dynamics, everybody is attracted, both men and women, boys and girls are attracted to the, physically fit, sort of pushy, domineering kind of individual on the playground, whether that's because you're afraid of them or because they are the biggest and the strongest, or because, they are going to push or pull their weight around. So, I mean, why do you think it is that as young kids, we already defer outer power to somebody who is of that personality? I mean, I find it interesting. I understand it, and I look at it, I remember it, but what's the perspective on why do we actually give this much deference to like the bullies?
I think it's fear. I think I think people have to be at a low point in their lives, and they're looking for somebody to rescue them. So there again, I think it goes back. It's a combination of low self-esteem, and that could be, talk about what's going on today. People were feeling that, no matter what they did, they couldn't get ahead. Financially, they were struggling. They were looking for somebody to rescue them. They didn't have confidence in their abilities to move forward or to succeed. And so I think they just were grasping for something. And narcissistic people love to promote themselves, and let them know loud and clear that that they're there, and they're the answer to everything. And people were just people were desperate. I don't know. One thing I've never seen any statistics on, which I would love to see. I know we don't want to talk politics, but I'm wondering what the numbers of voters, men versus women, who supported the administration that we currently have. Were there more men? I suspect that there would be, but I've never seen that number. I don't know if you have or not.
I have to tell you that one of the things that really gets under my skin is, and this answers your question, I don't know that information, but there are still women today that follow their spouse's lead. If they're, like if their spouse is a, diehard XYZ, then it's like they don't have their own thoughts about it. They just, and nothing aggravates me more, Sandy, than a woman who repeats her husband's words, but doesn't have her own thoughts. I mean, when I find that one, and I sort of feel like, it really aggravates me so much when women might be married to a high income earner or a titled person, and they don't have any of their own accolades to talk about, but they just keep talking about their spouse. Like, we should all just look up to this person. It just makes me crazy. It makes me crazy.
It makes me crazy too. And sadly enough, I mean, despite the fact that there's been an elevation in women being a little bit more respected, there are still so many of those women. I mean, I see that so much. I think, like I said, I live in a 55 and older, and I just see, so it's a generation where that's what they were used to, and they haven't left there. So they still rely on their husband. They ask permission. They have to ask permission if they can go someplace. They have to ask permission to, they won't share their thoughts openly. They'll kind of whisper it. They don't want to be overheard by their husband. And it's very, very, it's sad, but I just want to grab these women and just, grab them by the shoulders and shake them up and say, what is wrong with you? Yeah. Don't you have a brain of your own? And, I think that they forgot. They don't know how to think anymore. I mean, they've been told that they're not very bright. And they're to be, like I said, I got that impression from my father a lot. To be seen and not heard. That's the one word that stands out in my childhood. I used to hear that all the time. And I think this is how my mother was with my father. And he was the boss, even though she really made him the person that he became. But she was in the background, and he got credit for everything. She put the words into his mouth, and he would take them and make them his own, but she wouldn't mouth those words herself to other people because she's not supposed to be thinking. So it's sad, but it's also, like I said, I agree with you. It's not just sad. It's infuriating.
Yeah. And I will say that for the women that you're talking about, of that certain age group, to your point about low self-esteem, this article says psychologists find that narcissistic leaders are more appealing to people with low self-esteem. The lower our opinion of ourselves, the more insecure we're feeling, the higher our opinions of narcissists are. And so there's definitely that. I mean, I do think that just from, even from evolution, I mean, I'm sure that when we're talking about, what, males were to provide for females in terms of evolution, you got your protector, your progenitor, and, your provider for food and things like that. But then at some point, it becomes a learned behavior with these couples. Like, yes, you're attracted to this person who looks like what you want. You think they're going to provide for you and, all these other things. And then, but as that relationship grows and each person matures, there's got to be a point where either, as in our current president, you realize that they're just full of hot air, or, it's a lot of bluster and there's nothing real or, anything with integrity behind that. But I think that's for people in marriages, I feel like they then continue that learned behavior and never separate themselves or, even challenge the dynamic, which to me, that sounds like such a painful way to live, to know you're living a lie and to just continue following the rules for the rest of your life. It just seems like a punishment of some kind. I really don't know how they can tolerate that long term. I really don't.
I agree. I don't know if that's ever going to change or not. And you would think by now women would see that. I mean, they would look at leaders. There are women leaders out there that, please, presidents' wives, that Michelle Obama, look at what Hillary Clinton. I'm not just picking Democrats, but any woman that has been successful out there today, you would think other women would look at them, and I bet there's got to be some envy. There's got to be some, like, I wish I could be like that.
Yeah.
But I've known women who were, always lived in the background of their whole lives, and suddenly they didn't have that man in front of them, but they were still afraid. They were still afraid. They didn't know how. They didn't know how to be any other way. They were afraid of. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I find so offensive is that when you talk about a female being in a position of power, whether that's an executive position in a corporation or if it's, the leader of a country, we always bring up hormones and emotionality and menopause. And like, do you want a woman, having the information for, the bombs and all that stuff? And it's just so ridiculous to me because we make women's hormones seem to be something like supernatural or something evil. And I'm sure there's parts of that go into, places in the way women were treated with Salem and witches and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like in 2026, when there's still some reference to that, there's some residue to that, it just feels unbelievable to me. It's just unbelievable that we're still hanging on to some of that crazy conversation as if we're still living in the 1800s. One of the things that it talks about in the article is about how women leaders are the opposite of the narcissistic male lead. That, most women are very humble. They like to get credit where credit is due. They do a lot of mentorship and they share the limelight and the credit with other people that actually have worked on a project together. So women are extremely comfortable with themselves to be able to share the praise with other people and be inclusive. Whereas, these narcissistic male leaders, are like limelight hogs, right? They want to be the only person in the screenshot, right? It's all about them. And I don't know why, as the general public, we can't see that for what it is, really. I mean, it just seems so unattractive at this age to see somebody who is such a ball hog. Like maybe a ball hog, seemed powerful when you were 7 or 8 years old. But
Right.
a ball hog just seemed like somebody I don't want to be around or anybody to have a conversation with because they don't come across as being really bright. You don't
Yeah.
have an intellectual conversation with a ball hog who is going to push you down when they disagree with you.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out, like, what is it about that personality that people just get sucked into that I find just so unattractive.
Yeah. I think, like I said, I think it's fear and they poor self-esteem and I don't know what else, but definitely those two things, fear and poor self-esteem is what I would hope people would overcome. But I don't know that there's any way you can change somebody. I mean, if they've been that way that their whole life, there's anything you could do to ever change them. To give them the confidence that they need.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into that in terms of being able to support somebody's insecurities, whether it's a female or a young girl or such, to lift them up. And, as women, I think we've spent generations trying to do that, to create the next generation of female leaders, whether you do that, with things like the Girl Scouts or mentorship programs or, Big Brother, Big Sister kind of programs, and really, going after showing girls that they can be so much bigger than, that maybe the women were raised 50, 60, 100 years ago to be. And so I think we've made a lot of progress. And I think we really need to be careful that we are not going to let us slide. And you and I talked about this before, with the things like Roe versus Wade and some of the other things that are being slowly taken away from women that we have worked so hard to, bring with us. It's going to take generations to get that back. So all the work that women have done, like yourself, that have really, showed us young women what we've taken for granted because we had these things already. It's going to take a lot of extra work to get us back to where we were before, the last 3-4 years. And so it's really devastating to me as a woman leader, as a mother of, a child that is fighting for, to find her power in this, in this current society, and trying to negotiate the fact that, we're taking steps backward where it looks like we're going back into servitude, and we did on this podcast, a conversation about trad wives and what that means. That was a phrase that I hadn't heard until, we talked about it and really understood it. And it just makes my skin crawl almost to think about the fact that we are going to literally go backwards, and we're going to praise women for having more children and giving up their careers and, feeling like being a stay-at-home mom and cooking and cleaning and serving their spouse is what is going to define you as a woman. I mean, to me, that is just so repugnant. Is the only word that comes to, and it's just so.
No, it is. I agree. I know it's a good choice. It's a good word. I mean, I can't think of anything else. And it makes me, that's years on you, and it makes me so sad to see that we're at this place. And I thought by now, I mean, I always had hope for the future, but now I fear for, I have granddaughters, and I have granddaughters coming up, and what this world is going to be like for them. Are they going to have to? They're going to this. We shouldn't be fighting this battle. This shouldn't be a battle. We should be on equal ground. If anything, I hate to say this, but I'm not saying men aren't bright. There's a lot of very bright men out there, but there are so many women that are certainly can be doing a far superior job to some of the leaderships that we have, not just now, but what we've seen in the past. And, I was hoping that I would get to see, a woman president, by this time. I'm not saying that's impossible. We still have another election. Hopefully I'll still be around when the next election comes, and I would love to see, I think we are so overdue for a female leader in this country right now. Something's got to change, but like I said, it's just pathetic that we're still fighting this battle.
And
It shouldn't be a battle anymore.
there are days that I think to myself, and it sounds like a silly idea, but it's almost like since men cannot carry children, and of course it takes two people to procreate, so it's not like either person can do it without the other. But
Right.
I feel like, is that the one thing that just creates an uncontrollable fear for men, that we as women can now procreate without having to be in a relationship with them? Is that something that really scares the crap out of men? I mean, I hate to be that blunt, but I just sort of think to myself, men can't procreate on their own. We as women can procreate on our own. And so it feels like it does allow us to have more control over our body, more choices about who we decide to parent with. And I think those kinds of things cut men out of the picture, and it makes them feel very insecure and unstable. And I think that is what results and has resulted in some of the going backwards to because women have become way too independent. And when women don't have to lean on men for their own, survival, then all of a sudden things get out of balance. And when things get out of balance, that tilts towards women, that puts all kind of fear in men. And I really believe in my core that that's what we're living through right now. And whereas women are, women typically want to do what's best for everybody, not only at a corporate governance and board level, but also as a country. We're never going to make emotional decisions out of anger, because that's what now, a lot of decisions are being made out of a power and control issue instead of what's best for everybody, including the world, not just the United States, but the world. And so it's just there's so many ironies in this conversation that it really is mind-blowing to me. It really does not compute in my head, but yet that's the reality we're currently living in. We have a lot of men out there protesting and supporting women and fighting for the privileges that women are slowly losing grip with. Dan and I do a lot of protesting together, and he supports women and he supports me. And so, I think that that's the nice thing that I see coming out of it is that it's not, I think in the 60s and 70s, feminists, there were just a lot of women out there fighting. And once again, it became an issue between the genders, right? And then there were the men who wanted to keep things traditional. But today I see that there are a lot of couples and a lot of single men and a lot of single women. And, everybody's up there trying to promote the right thing. And so we have to give it to the men who are supporting women. And we acknowledge you. We love you for doing that and supporting us. And, we need more. And so I don't want to be completely a naysayer, because those men are also, enlightened, and they understand what we can do when both genders are equally empowered to be at their best. That makes the world a better place. And I think that a lot more men now supporting women's issues than you had, 50 years ago, when you were just trying to get a break and make, just start a business to better your own lives and your children's lives. And now we have so many more men that support us in that goal. So that's a wonderful change, and I appreciate that so much. Yeah. Well, there's always hope. We outlive men by quite a bit, so maybe there'll be an opportunity for them to, go out there and give it a go in a different fashion. It's possible, but I can't. Once again, Sandy, I say this every time you and I talk, that it's already been 35 minutes since we started talking. To our listeners, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it was something that I'm passionate about and wanted to give it some teeth and some legs. And Sandy helped me do that. Please know you can reach out to us via Gmail or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast to get in touch with us. If you have thoughts about this, please let us know what they are. If you agree, if you disagree, we're interested in all opinions. Thank you. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.